Hello my friends and welcome to my studio. I'm Vlad Duchev, oil painting techniques and tips. Oh, I forgot my tea. Give me a second. Okay, so today we're going to look at, guess what? You're right, oil paints. The different brands and different colors and what is actually inside the tube, why the different tubes or from different brands cost different, different prices. Why one tube costs $5 and another tube costs $150. So it's very simple, it's not complicated, so let's get started. So in order to understand why different paint tubes cost different amounts, let's look inside the tube. What is actually inside the tube? And this will give you the answer, and you will understand what to look for, because your experience as an oil painter, especially in the beginning, should be absolutely good. So you should enjoy painting. You will have some struggles because it's like any learning process. You will be struggling, but even through going through some struggles, you should enjoy. And one of the best things to do, and this is what I always recommend, you have to use proper tools. You have to use proper paint. You have to use proper brushes, you have to use proper canvases, easels, and so on and so on and so on. And this is what I normally teach. Use proper tools. Okay, so let's go back to tubes. To understand why the price is different and what to look when you're buying and selecting your brands, you have to understand what is inside. And it's very simple, very simple. So there's three main parts inside the tubes. One is main part of the oil paint, and this is pigment. Yes, the powder, the color powder that actually makes the color is called pigment, and that pigment, amount of the pigment inside the tube is the cost of your tube, plus maybe a little bit portion of the brand that you're buying. For example, if you're buying Vasari, you're gonna pay more because it's a good name. It's a luxury paint, but there is the reason they have a name, and you're paying more because again, as I said, the pigmentation inside the tube is huge compared to any other brands. Because keep in mind, you have to understand one thing. All the manufacturers from all the brands that we have in supply stores, they actually buying the same pigments from probably the same companies, because there is I did some research. There are 5-6 suppliers of pigments in the world. So all the manufacturers in Europe, here in the United States or in Asia, they buying the same same pigments. Maybe different quality, I'm not sure, but I think it's the same pigment. So if they buying the same pigment, and process is very simple, and just molding the paint together and putting them together. I didn't see different method of making paint. I think this is this is for sure the different prices dictated by how much pigments is actually in a tube. So if you have a tube and the pigment is very, the portion of pigment is very small, is like maybe only 3%, the cost of the tube will be cheaper, much cheaper. If you, for example, take mid-grade, what I call artist or professional grade, like gambling, the level of pigment or pigmentation in tube is about 50-60%. Or if you take, that's the reason why this tube is more expensive than cheap one. Or if you take, for example, Vasari, very expensive paint. This tube I have, this is the only tube I use from Vasari, Ruby Violet, yes. This costs about $60. Why? The reason why, because the pigmentation is huge and it's loaded with pigment. So the first part, which is dictate the price of the tube, is pigment. how much pigment inside the tube. The second part is very simple, is the oil to mix the pigment, the powder, color powder. This is the second part right here. And the third part is additives or stabilizer. That's a really small, tiny part. I'm not sure, for example, if Vasari is actually adding any stabilizing additives. I'm not sure. So, three main parts inside the tube. And the main reason, this is what you have to understand, the main reason you're paying more money for the tube, because let's say for Vasari, $60, sometimes $80, sometimes $150. You're paying because it's the pigment, the cost of the pigment, and the amount of pigment inside. So two reasons. First, not every pigment costs the same, even from distributors of pigments, right? The powder, actual powder. So I know cobalt costs a little bit more than let's say, marble powder for titanium white. That's why titanium white is less expensive, even on most expensive brand, because marble is everywhere and it's easy to make, and the cost is less. Cobalt blue is a relatively expensive powder to make, to produce. That's why it costs more. But on top of this, the cost of the powder or pigment, on top of this, actually amount of pigment inside the tube is will dictate the cost of the tube as well. So, and the third part is and the oil is price of the oil is the same, and the additives like stabilizer is the same. So they're not dictating the price of the tube. Okay, so the main reason why the tube is more expensive is the powder is expensive, and the amount of the powder or pigment inside the tube is more, just ratio of the mix. So the pigment, there is just more pigment inside the tube. So, and we will look at the amount of pigment at this point. So let's say if we take cobalt blue from different brand, why there's so different prices of cobalt blue, starting from, let's say, $5 to $150. Main reason, the amount of pigment. So there is several categories of brands, oil paints from different brands. Some brands, yes, you pay for just for name of the brand, but majority of the time it's just how much pigment is actually inside the tube. So let's break it into several categories. So basically there's three categories of oil paints from different brands. So one category is student grade, which is, let's say if you take a tube, the pigmentation ratio is about, I'm not sure, but I would say 10, maybe 15%, and maybe less. It depends on the brand. And the rest is a little bit of oil, and the rest is filler. So pigment, a little bit of pigment, a little bit of oil, and then the rest, this is the fourth part, the fourth part is a filler. And the filler, the good example of the filler, if you take, I'm using gambling gel, solvent-free gel. So if you take, let's say, titanium white, cobalt blue, a little bit of cobalt blue, a little bit of titanium white, mix them together, and that add your gel, it's not going to change the color, right? When you mix it on the palette, it's not going to change the color. It will change amount because you're filling with transparent gel. But when you make this mix, and it will start adding another color loaded with powder or pigment, your mixes will be off, completely off, because the amount of pigment in titanium white and cobalt was not enough to hold the mixture of another pigment. Got it? So the same student grade, the student grade is the same way. So the student grade is a little bit of pigment, a little bit of oil, and then the rest is a filler, just transparent filler, like a silicone, so to speak. All right, so this is a student grade, and most deceiving name, student grade, because for students, it's not really. It just, they cannot call it, you know, not much pigment grade. They call it student grade. So I would recommend avoid using student grades just because your experience will be not pleasant. You know, I went through this. A lot of painters went through this. So, but you be smart. Just listen to what, you know, what we're teaching you or what we're sharing our experience. Don't use the student grade. There's a line of manufacturers that they have artist grade and student grade. So I would recommend, it's your choice, but I would recommend avoid student grade paint because it will be bad experience. So be smart. So next grade will be artist or professional. And I would recommend probably, you know, recommend staying in this pool of paint. And it's a huge pool. I would recommend gambling. And again, I'm not affiliated with any of manufacturers. I'm buying this. I can show you receipts from art supply stores. I'm buying this paint, and whatever I have for reviews, accessories, and products, I bought myself. I don't like being paid for, you know, for reviews, because that's not honest reviews. So one of the artists or professional grade is gambling, Williamsburg right here, Richeson, and so on and so on. Lukas, another good name. One that I would recommend, and again, nobody's paying me for this advertising. But I would recommend, highly recommend, not because I'm from, actually I'm not from Russia, I'm from Ukraine, but this is a Russian paint that all professional Russian painters are using. This is called St. Petersburg, a master class, loaded with pigment, loaded. And the cost, this will probably one good exemption of loaded with pigment, but cost less. I'm not sure why, because it's Russian paint, I have no idea. But the tubes are loaded with pigment, loaded. So like I would compare probably this to like luxury paint, like the Vasari or Blue Ridge, loaded. And the cost is probably 1/3. And you can get this paint only from Jackson Supply Art Store. So this is a good, but I put this not in the luxury because it's the cost. It costs from $5, $7, $12, $15, $17, which is really good for the tube. And this is 40 mil tubes. Also, the tubes comes with three main sizes: 37 mil, 40 mil, and 150 and 200 mils. Four. I don't use big tubes. I use 37 and 40 mil tubes, only because I paint outside a lot, study outside and in plein air, and big tubes are not comfortable for me to carry. All right, so let's go back to our subject. So artist or professional grade, loaded with pigment, so probably 50% of pigment, and then oil, and then additive, maybe even sometimes more. So, and there's a line of brands for artists and professional oil paints. And you will find them, mostly you will find them on like Jerry's Artorama, Bleak, Utrecht, and Jackson, this kind of paints. And then the third category, which I call luxury paints, are very expensive. The reason why, because they are loaded with pigment. We know that pigment is the base of the prices, derive the prices. So, for example, Blue Ridge oil colors made in Carolina, I think it's South Carolina, or maybe North Carolina, not sure. It's a 40 mil tubes, kind of falling into luxury because of the prices, but also because they are loaded with pigments. I mean, I'm not sure how much, but I would say whole thing is pigment, just loaded with the pigments. Very stable paints, not a lot of variety of paints, of colors, But if you find something that you can use, very pleasant to use. But it's a little bit more expensive. And then another one is let's say Vasari, very expensive. Again, it's just loaded with pigments. So highly recommend, but recommend from standpoint of the very quality oil paints. But as a painter, and I'll be talking about my experience. The reason I'm not using a lot of Vasari, the only reason I'm using this Vasari, I have several tubes of Vasaris that I'm using, and the only reason because I was taking Scott Richeson workshop, and he's using only Vasari. Of course, he's not paying because he's constantly advertising Vasari, and they probably have a deal, and he's not buying for tube that if you would pay $50, I think he's paying a little bit less, to be honest. So that's why he's using Vasari. There is some painters, artists that they have agreement with manufacturers. They kind of promote this paint, and the only reason they promote because of course they like it because it's a good loaded pigment tubes. But they're buying it cheaper, so they will be promoting it. If Vasari will call me and say, hey, we're gonna give you it for half of the price, would you promote it? Oh, of course. Maybe not. But the reason I'm using artist and professional grade because it's I'm avoiding using student grade, and I'm kind of avoiding using luxury like Vasari, Old Holland, Old Bain brands because they're very expensive. They're loaded with pigment. Don't get me wrong. They are loaded with pigments. This is the best paint you can use, but I'm still learning, and I think I will be learning until the end. I tested. Let's say Vasari was a little bit less expensive. I didn't see, huge difference. I just don't see. So that's the reason I stick to artist and professional grades. But sometimes, for example, the reason I'm using Vasari again, because I cannot find this color, not this brand. I cannot find this color that I tried and I really like, and I'm using it constantly. And I tried looking at Masterclass, St. Petersburg, Blue Ridge, and Old Bain. I cannot find the same color with the same mix, with the same experience. So I kind of got stuck with this color Vasari, and I like it. So that's the reason I'm using this. And then there is another one is Shiprock, which costs like $40. Again, I cannot find something that is same, I mean, you have the same experience kind of. So then I have, for example, I'm using, just recently not recently, a couple of years ago, I started using St. Petersburg paint. And when I discovered this paint, even though I'm from Russia, and when I was studying in Ukraine, I was using this paint and I completely forgot. So when I kind of restarted here in the United States, and a couple of years ago, I rediscovered this, and I was like, wow, I'm switching to this. But unfortunately, the colors that I'm on my palette, I cannot find the same colors from this brand. So I end up using probably 5 or 6 different brands, but it's based on colors, not of brands, because the pigmentation, I'm fine to my minimum, and this is what I recommend for you. Your minimum should be artist grade or professional. Don't go below this. If you cannot go, don't just start painting. So it will be useless. You will just waste a lot of money, which I did, and a lot of probably artists did. So be smart. Just learn from us. All right. So this is about the brands. If you go to any art supply stores or in a local store, go to oil paint in an alley, and you will see actually grades actually on the shelves. A1, A2, A3, like sometimes G1, G2, G3. And then you will see the J1 is like from $12 to $15. J2 is from up to $25, and 3 is up to $50. Well, this is not because of the brand, the name. That's because this tube, $50, loaded with pigment, and that's why you're paying. You know, do you really need that, you know, load of the pigment? Because you're selling your artwork for, you know, $1,000, then you can afford this. But if you're selling it for a couple $1,000, maybe it will be fine with the artisan, professional grade brands. This is what I'm using. All right. So to conclude, what is inside the paint? Pigment, which dictates the price of the tube, then oil, and then additive or stabilizer, right? So you're paying for, basically, if you want to get tube and loaded with a pigment, you have to pay a little bit more. Plus, some pigments cost more because of the actual powder, color powder cost. It's expensive to produce. That's why it's so expensive. So if you, let's say you'll find one tube of, I always use cobalt blue, right? It just, if you compare it to any other colors, it's like cobalt blue, for some reason, boom, it just bumps because the powder is more expensive. So, and then from cobalt blue, if you take different brands, let's say one brand is $5, another brand is $17, and another brand is $57. Okay, $5, don't use it because you know the amount of pigment is not much. Then, you know, $80 or $70 do you really need this load of pigment? Because you're going to use probably the same amount of oil from the same tube. So that's why, you know, artisan professional grade is probably your choice. So please let me know if you have any questions. Shoot, put the comments, and if you have any questions, I promise I will get to you and I'll give you the answer. And also, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell. This will help us to keep going and produce more and more video about, you know, tips, reviews, and doing demos. So thank you for watching. I will see you next time.